Hi there, this is Don Forsyth talking to you about group dynamics. I'm going to just very briefly talk about group development, uh, focus primarily on Bruce Tuckman's stage theory of group development, and also mention Robert Bales' more cyclical approach to group development. Last time, if you joined us, we talked about the sources of group cohesion, social cohesion, task cohesion, collective, emotional, and structural factors that influence cohesion, but cohesion is something that takes time for a group to develop. It's very rare that you find a group that's instantly a cohesive, unified group. It generally must mature, just like the analogy is between a person and a group, that just as people grow up over time, they go through stages of development, groups do as well. And different theorists have described this developmental process in different ways, but we'll talk primarily today about Tuckman's classic stage approach and Bales' cyclical approach to group development. The basic idea is that groups develop, they change over time, but each group is not necessarily unique, that it moves through relatively predictable stages as it develops. The stages aren't necessarily discrete steps, so that it's clear when a group is in one stage and not in another stage. Oftentimes these stages overlap, and it's difficult to determine, for example, if the group is in the performing stage or still in the storming stage. But the idea is that groups deal with certain problems over time. A group, for example, must become structured in a way. There has to be a development of influence within the group, the assignment of roles within the group. There has to be a set of expectations developed over time. And it takes time for this to emerge. And so a group on its first meeting will be different from a group on its second meeting, third meeting, on its final meeting as it adjourns. The two basic approaches are the stage models, which suggest that there are steps that groups move for, and the cyclical models, which suggest that no, there's issues that groups deal with over time, and they cycle back and forth as they deal with these issues as they become more prominent. The best known stage model approach to group development would be Bruce Tuckman's approach, where he discusses over time the group will become more cohesive and it will probably perform more effectively. He gave these stages of development memorable terms. There's the forming stage, the conflict stage, which he called the storming stage. And as you can see, the group initially forms, it becomes more cohesive, but then it experiences some issues in terms of structure and control. Oftentimes, this conflict is based upon who's in charge, who's the most influential, who gets the best roles, and who gets the less exciting roles. But the group will eventually deal with those, and structure is stabilized over time. Cohesion continues to grow until eventually it reaches a peak in terms of its cohesion and its performance. It's capable of monitoring its performance and getting feedback to its individuals. His theory then is summarized as with these 5 labels: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, which doesn't quite rhyme as nicely, but he did suggest that yes, a group doesn't last forever, and eventually it will reach the stage where it dissolves. The group members go their separate ways. His is a successive stage model of group development. An alternative would be, for example, Bales' equilibrium model. His is a cyclical approach. Bales has long argued that there's 2 basic sets of behaviors that occur within groups. Many of the behaviors are task-oriented, performance-focused, focusing on the work that has to be done, the tasks that related to the group. Other behaviors are more relationship-oriented, making sure the group is cohesive and members' needs are met. And over time, these orientations will wax and wane. So a group, for example, which is focused on task for a prolonged period of time will find that its relationships among group members may weaken. So it loses some of its cohesion, and therefore the group needs to spend more time regaining cohesive strength, rebuilding relationships among members. So it will shift from a task orientation to a relationship orientation. But once it's resecured those relationships, between the members, it can go back to a task orientation. So this was a cyclical model that you would cycle back between a task orientation and a relationship orientation. Seeking this equilibrium, a balance between, you wouldn't want to have too much task orientation, too much relationship orientation. You need to balance those. Research has tended to support Bales's approach, but has added one more element, sometimes described as the punctuated equilibrium model. Punctuated in the sense that certain events within the group can punctuate the cycle, can cause it to change in a dramatic fashion. For example, the halfway point in a group's life. What researchers have found that in many cases when a group is assigned a task to complete, and say for example they know they have 3 months to complete it, the first month and a half is very different from the second month and a half. That oftentimes very little work will be done. In fact, there might be a focus on relationship orientation during the first month or even 2 months. But then when the deadline stares them in the face and they realize they must have a product, then that will punctuate their group's development. They'll shift to a more dramatic and task-focused orientation, so you have to take that into account. Of course, both of these approaches, the cyclical and stage models, are culturally dependent. In cultures where there's not as much focus on time and productivity in relationship to time, the group might go through an entirely different type of development. The next topic to consider is some of the consequences of cohesion, but I'll turn to that in my next presentation. Thank you for joining me, and have a good day.